for the record, the answer to the question is if there's a moral value to human beings, just a priori,
No.
the answer is no.
There is no a priori
Okay.
moral value. I do not believe in any kind of a priori values in that sense, no. So you believe that the Geneva Conventions must be followed even if your opponent does not follow them.
So let's find out who friends are, and I go with a very specific example. Are Poland and Germany friends at this moment? You are about to watch a yes-no debate, and this means that at every turn, one of us will ask a yes-no question to the other, and this question must be answered either with a yes, no, depends, false premise, or I don't know. Of course, also some elaboration can be added and often also will be added, but the answer has to be there. If you are interested more in the method, just visit the website yesnodebate.org. There you will also find a flowchart that we will follow, but right here the debate will just start now. Welcome to a new yes-no debate, this time with Kiran, who is blogging on liminal revolutions on Substack. And the question we want to elaborate today is, should morality be only for friends? To which you answer with yes, correct?
Yes.
Why do you think that? And maybe also, if you want, you can also tell a bit about yourself.
Sure. So I blog under Liminal Revolutions on Substack. It's about philosophy of science, psychology, and increasingly in the future, a systems level analysis of social systems and how that applies across scales from biological to social and cultural. So the reason I believe that morality is for friends only is because morality is an evolved system that enables cooperation at the group level. And different people with different proclivities, different capacities, have evolved different systems of behavioral norms in order to facilitate cooperation within their group and, in a larger context, to facilitate competition with other groups while maintaining internal group cohesion. And so morality only applies to people living within that particular ethnocultural genetic group where their system of morality, and there are many different systems of morality among different peoples, is specifically tailored to those people that live in the group and who enforce those shared norms. So that's why morality is only for friends, where friends are members of the group, and we can elaborate on what that means to be a member of the group if necessary.
Mm-hmm. So I heard about the concept or the theory just yesterday by watching a YouTube video that we also link below. And my questions will thus be only explorative. My hunch, though, is that to answer this with no, because I do think that also people from outside our group, outside our norms, do have a moral value. I definitely agree it is fine to prioritize our own people over other people, but to attribute them a zero moral value, that's how I assume, at least how I read what I thought after watching the video, that would be a wrong thing. And one example for this, which I also ask about in the first question, is if it would be okay to kill all people on a new island that we just discovered that with people that we had no relations before. And I would answer that definitely with no. So that would be actually my first question. This is my reasoning is done. So is that something we could do? We find a new island, there are people on it which we don't know. Is it fine we have no relations, no contract with them? Would it be fine to kill them all?
So I'm going to say this is assuming a false premise. So when we talk about intergroup conflict, there's only two reasons that we could say that it should not occur. One is that it is possible to have more gains through cooperation with that group, or that direct conflict with that group will be more costly than it is advantageous. Now, if you extrapolate just those two principles to their logical conclusion, it basically says that we can genocide the whole planet and kill all other forms of life, and this would be acceptable as long as those two premises are not violated. But I do think there is also an aesthetic value for biodiversity in general. I wouldn't want there to be mass extinction events. On top of which, there is, like I said, the evolved psychological framework that all humans have. Now, these are different between different humans and different between groups, but all humans have some kind of evolved moral framework. And not everybody will be comfortable with taking these actions. In fact, I think historically, at least Europeans are generally uncomfortable taking these kinds of actions, and so would not want to do this in the first place. And this leads to things like values of, like I said, biodiversity. Europeans contribute a very large amount to maintaining species diversity, ecological integrity, and diversity across the planet. So I don't see why we would want to genocide this group simply because we came across them.
Yeah, I think you picked a false premise, but I think your reasoning more sounds like a no, because false premise actually would mean that in the question that I asked, like in these words I uttered, there was a false premise included. Like they just making describing the method. So the typical false premise question is like, have you stopped beating your wife? Which is like,
sure.
So I assume like the very question didn't contain a false premise. It's just the curious question. Like we find
It
a new
required some nuance that needed to be elaborated in order to
Okay.
answer the question appropriately.
But like the
I'm not saying there are no circumstances in which you would take over the island.
Yeah.
I'm simply saying that it would probably not be a prudent or psychologically congruent thing to do. But there are many groups in history who would simply do that, yes.
So my question is actually, is there any moral value to these people on the island that you haven't met before, just inherently in these beings?
I do not believe in inherent moral value. I think all value needs to be causally constructed. So there's no such thing as an inherent value. If you take, for instance, the Yamnaya, they would have probably just genocided the people and taken their women, yes? And this is true of, practically all human groups in evolutionary history, practically all organismal groups in general, right? Ecological conflict is inherently extinctionary.
Okay, so just to for the record, the answer to the question is if there's a moral value to human beings, just a priori,
No.
the answer is no.
There is no a priori
Okay.
moral value. I do not believe in any kind of a priori values in that sense, no.
Okay. Can you give me a scenario where it would be okay to kill all those people on a newly discovered island? Question mark. So can you give me one?
So
and if yes,
again,
feel free to do so.
I consider this a false premise because is it okay? Okay is smuggling in a pre-existing morality, right? And I'm saying that this is a false premise because morality is constructed at the group level, which is why it's for friends only, right? If you talked to a Yamnaya 4,000 years ago and said, is it okay that you genocided all the people in, Eastern Poland, or, you enslaved them and took their women, that question would simply not compute for them.
Yeah. I mean, for the record, you gave me an example, so yes, you could give me an example, but then you say that my example assumes a false premise.
Yes.
Okay. Well, the thing is, I'm sitting here to ask you. So I'm asking you with your morals. I'm not asking the Yamnaya. So this is why I just would like to know from you, with your moral convictions, with your moral compass, do you see a scenario where this thing, seeing new people, new island, killing them all, where this would be an okay thing to do from your moral values, from your perspective?
I think theoretically a circumstance could be constructed. However, that would require iterating over the necessary predisposing factors, the existing situation, both in my group and in the foreign group, and then figuring out, based on the balance of possible benefits and losses, what would be the appropriate action. So I cannot give you a specific scenario because the devil is in the details for all of these questions. However, I can give you a grammar with which you would analyze this question.
Okay, but so basically you don't exclude that. You don't exclude this possibility.
I do not a priori exclude this possibility.
Okay. Okay, I would have some more questions, but I also want to give you the scene. So if you have some questions for me that maybe you have this conviction, you probably know where I come from. So what would you ask me to get to your belief?
What is a being that does not have an inherent moral value?
Okay, yes, no question. So can you tell me if there's a being or?
Does a bacteria have inherent moral value?
Yeah, it's a good one. My hunch is no, but I kind of see where you might go with that. But yeah, my hunch is no at this point. Yeah,
Does a mouse have inherent moral value?
it does. Yes.
Does a grasshopper have inherent moral value?
Somewhere between a bacteria and a mouse.
That's not a yes or no.
Correct. Yes. So yes, there is one, but it's way lower. Probably I go. My factor, deciding factor, would be the sentience.
How do you operationalize sentience?
I guess there is. So hang on. Yes, no question. Can you tell me? I guess you asked me.
Can you explain how you
Yes.
operationalize sentience?
Yeah. In fact, no, because I'm not really an expert. My hunch would be, I can't really explain, but I can just say how I probably would approach it. And I know approaches via complexity of cognitive capacity. So like the more cognitive capacity, the more sentient these people a being is. But then, of course, I know the philosophical questions about like, what can you do with sleeping people and so on. So then it's about the potential of sentience. So I can't really. I'm sorry, no.
Does a being with cognitive capacity who is an enemy have moral value to you?
Yes, of course. Yes, there is. So if say there is a country attacking my country, then the soldiers are my enemies or the leader, but they still have a moral value as being human beings. So yes.
Can you explain how the moral value of the enemy results in some kind of observable difference in terms of conduct or behavior towards them, or some such construct such that we can distinguish what it means for somebody to have moral value versus not have moral value?
Yes. So, for instance, when we fight a war, we have the Geneva Conventions, and we subscribe to them. And even if we're being attacked, and we're even being at the danger of extinction, the moral thing to do is to adhere to these conventions.
So you said in danger of extinction. Is it possible to drive a group extinct within the bounds of the Geneva Conventions while maintaining the Geneva Conventions?
No, because the conventions, as far as I know them, of course, they disallow genocide. Yes. So no. The answer is no.
So can you explain the maximal level of threat to a group when engaged in intergroup conflict within the bounds of the Geneva Conventions?
Can I explain the maximum what?
The maximal extent of threat to a group in terms of loss of land, resources, genetic capital, all the way up to genocide. That would be the complete erasure of that group. What is the maximal extent of the threat to a group when operating in an environment of intergroup conflict within the bounds of the Geneva Conventions?
Basically, what I understand is how much should we keep following the Geneva Conventions regarding the even if we are like being at the brink of actual extinction, if the other enemy is not adhering to it himself.
So you previously said the Geneva Conventions mean that extinction is not a possibility with intergroup conflict within the Geneva Conventions.
If people follow them, yes.
Right. So you believe that the Geneva Conventions must be followed even if your opponent does not follow them.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's the usual question: should you follow them if they're not doing it? To some extent, yes, but
so it depends.
To some extent, yes.
Is that the same as it depends?
Yeah, it's a good point. I probably have to go with I don't know because I can't tell the factor. I do think I can't tell the telling factor, but I do think you should adhere to morals even if your enemy is not, to some extent. But at some point, of course, especially if you are at maybe I have to correct myself from before, if you are really at the danger of getting extinct, then and the enemy is not following the conventions, then it's okay to not follow them yourself. But not from the very first violation.
So can you explain the level of asymmetric risk that you would need to expose your group to before it becomes viable or morally acceptable to violate the Geneva Conventions when fighting an enemy who does not themselves follow them?
I mean, it's basically, I understand this is a similar question as before. Like, can I tell like how much I would allow to let this happen?
Yes.
And I can't give you a clear answer. So the answer is, I cannot. I don't. I just know it's similar. Like, I don't know. I mean, you're having a boxing fight, right? And you actually expect the other being honorable and like and the you know what I mean.
So at this point, I would ask, is your morality vibes-based? And explain if it's not vibes-based.
But I would need to... So is my morality vibes...
Given that you said you do not know the level of irreciprocity incurred towards your group before it is reasonable to no longer uphold norms that your opponent is not upholding... Mm-hmm. You said you don't know when that would be.
I know that.
So I can only assume that it would just be based on a subjective feeling, and again, that feeling is something that would be evolutionarily selected for, but that would be a vibes-based morality. It would be when your feeling says that it is appropriate.
Yeah. It's possible that it's vibes-based. I'm a layperson to this, so yes, I can't tell for sure. It could be vibes-based. But there's also a spectrum in the answer. I mean, you can either be fully not acknowledging any moral principles with your enemy from the start, or you can be fully vibes-based, you can fully be adherent to your morals, even if the other is breaking them. The latter one would be naive. The first one would be, I think, cruel or immoral to me. And I probably am somewhere in the spectrum. And so I can't tell you the clear distinction, but I don't say it's fully vibes based. You could probably say that being at the danger of actual extinction. So say like. You see the other is completely not following the norms. You still try to follow the norms, but then you're about to die or to get eradicated. Then it seems moral to me to also not adhere to the rules. But again, like you shouldn't do it from the start. I mean, it's like there is this. I can agree to this Christian approach that you, at least at the beginning, should still adhere even if the other is not adhering to the rules. So, is it vibes-based? To answer the question, not fully. No, not fully.
Okay. So, would it be consistent with your morality if we came up with a system of empirically and logically deciding when it becomes inappropriate to continue to follow rules that an opponent is not reciprocally enforcing?
Yeah, that would be consistent.
Right. And so what I'm saying is the system is morality is for friends only. When you describe the Geneva Convention, you are describing a reciprocal set of rules that even though there is conflict at one level, there is a greater degree of cooperation where both parties decide we will not take certain actions. And defection against this higher level of cooperation invalidates it unilaterally. It is not possible to maintain that higher level of cooperation when one party has decided they are not going to bear the costs of refraining from those behaviors. And so as soon as they do that, you are no longer bound by those rules either, and it is in fact disadvantageous, and I would say treasonous to the group, to insist that those rules
Yeah.
continue to be followed, right? Now, you can talk about a tit-for-tat strategy in an iterated game theory sense, where it might be acceptable in a non-tit-for-tat framework to forgive the first violation, but this mostly applies when there could be some kind of accident or some kind of failure of communication where a violation did not in fact occur, and it just seems like one did, and therefore it makes sense to forgive that violation because there's some threat of measurement error or, like I said, accident. However, if there's an accident, the opponent needs to then police that on their own group. Otherwise, if it's not policed, it is essentially condoned, right? When you don't police violations, you are, in effect, condoning violations.
So that's why I here want to ask again, like, or ask. So, is it for you okay to stop the cooperation from your side if you see one single violation from the other side?
If it is not policed on their side, yes. If it is not policed.
So if it's not policed, if you see like they are not following their rules, in the very first occasion, you drop all the approach, cooperative approach from your side.
So if you call their attention to the fact that the Geneva Conventions were violated, and they don't do anything about that, they're condoning whichever actor, as a member of their group, violated the Geneva Conventions, at which point they're not bearing the costs of refraining from behavior that would violate the Geneva Conventions, which means there is no framework of reciprocity which obliges you to then follow the Geneva Conventions. Now, you could take a minimalist or maximalist approach. You could either say that they have violated this one particular convention, and we can then violate that convention. We could even violate it. We have one freebie to violate it one time, because they've only violated one time so far. And so that would be the most limited aspect. But then you could also just maximally say that if you are not going to follow all of the conventions and enforce them all, then we will not do that either. And again, it depends on what level of reciprocity can be reasonably expected at the level of conflict between these two groups. If no level of reciprocity can be expected, no level of reciprocity should be offered at that point.
So actually, for the record, the answer was depends, depending on a reciprocity, expectation of reciprocity.
Yes.
I see. So maybe one very specific example, just from the recent days, we've seen violations of the European airspace by Russia. Would you say in this context, because Russia violated, I mean, they offered some excuses. They said, well, actually, they didn't deny, but they say it was an accident or something. But it keeps happening. We can, from our side, we might maybe even assume it's not really only an accident. So,
well,
given this, like, would it be okay that we, from our side, from our European NATO side on, now don't respect Russian airspace at all?
So you have to think about what is the retaliation that you expect from Russia. If you violate Russian airspace, you expect that your planes will be shot down. If Russia continually violates our airspace, we can inform them that they have violated our airspace on multiple occasions. They've claimed it's an accident. However, this is a continued pattern of behavior. People who want to violate reciprocity will very often claim that things are accidents. Like I said, because of tit-for-tat strategies, they want to avoid that initial retaliation. However, we can say that, given that this is a pattern of behavior, we do not believe your excuse. If it happens again, your plane will be shot down.
But the question was that they ask if we now may violate their airspace from now on.
False premise. You have no right to violate their airspace. It all depends on how they're going to retaliate.
Okay, so it's a no. My question did not contain a false premise. You just answered my questions with a no. We are not allowed to violate their airspace.
It's not about being allowed. Everything is in the framework of how will they retaliate. It's not about being allowed. We are allowed to violate their airspace, and they are allowed to shoot our planes down. That is the consequence of violating the airspace. It's not about being allowed.
Well, morality is about being allowed, or not?
No, it is not.
It's not about being allowed.
That is the entire point of what I'm saying. It is a framework. It is an iterated behavioral framework of cooperation and defections from cooperation. Everything is causally constructed. Nothing is a priori allowed or disallowed.
So the last approach, the last part I would just ask, because the part of the question is about friends. Like morality is only for friends.
Yes.
So let's find out who friends are, and I go with a very specific example. Are Poland and Germany friends at this moment?
I would say yes. However, I would have to define the framework within which we analyze who are friends, right? So giving a simple yes or no answer to this question is less informative than being able to determine who a friend is. So friends are people who agree to restrain their behavior in certain ways. They agree to adhere to a system of norms and to punish people who violate those norms. They agree to existential and reproductive continuity, so defend things to ensure group persistence, and they agree to reciprocal defense of each other. So we would have to look at the example of Poland and Germany in particular to see whether these metrics are satisfied in order to determine whether they are in fact friends, or whether perhaps there is a systematic irreciprocity within the dealings of these two countries to determine if they are in fact friends. From a naive analysis, where I am not a geopolitical analyst, I would say they appear to be friends. However, that might obscure systematic irreciprocities that we would need to specifically examine.
Okay, but I mean, you start with a yes. So basically, from what if you have to assess the situation, I heard you saying yes at the beginning. They are friends for you, given the current situation and your assessment.
However, I would say
Okay.
I lack the specific data, and I lack the time with which to analyze this data in order to give you a firm answer. So I cannot testify to the fact that they are friends. Under threat of perjury, I could not say, under my definition, which I have sketched out, that they
Okay.
are friends.
But
This
the
is not something that I'm able to do due diligence on in order to give you an answer.
I'll be more specific. I mean, we're talking about morality. Morality is
Yes.
only for friends. So in that context, are Germany and Poland friends enough to be moral to each other?
We observe that there are patterns of reciprocal constraint and other behaviors that are consistent with the definition of friend that I gave. And so in that sense, yes.
Okay. Were they friends in 1939?
Well, it seems like there were not patterns of reciprocal constraint at that time.
So the answer is no.
The answer would be no at that time.
Okay. Can you tell me when that changed?
No, because I have not done the due diligence to look at that time period in order to determine when the specific factors meeting my criteria were met.
Okay. But do you assume this was a process? So can you tell me whether this was a process or a certain point of time where this might have changed between not being friends and friends?
I mean, it would be commitment to, like I said, a shared system of restraints on behavior, punishment of norm violation, defense of existential and reproductive commons, etc. And it's a measurement problem. So you can quantify deviations from that framework of reciprocity, and then determine, I suppose, as a time series, how reciprocal or irreciprocal the various behavior of these countries was. And at that point, you could determine when things flipped from, say, overwhelming irreciprocity to general reciprocity between the groups. However, if you want to phrase it as a binary yes or no, then you would have to, under some scheme of quantification, come up with a threshold which, perhaps based on empirical data or perhaps a priori, you have demarcated as being reciprocal.
So the question was, is it a process? If I remember well, do you think it was a process when they became friends?
I'm saying that, again, I think this is a false premise, because you are trying to tie things to verbal categories which are not nailed down to measurable operations. And so the definition is not tied to any particular thing. It becomes a vibes-based definition. It's a non-scientific, vibes-based verbal definition. And it needs to be tied down to a specific way of measuring it. And at that point, it becomes a decidable question. Right now, the question you're asking is undecidable.
It's undecidable if it was a process or not.
Because when you ask, is it a process, there is no underlying operationalized measurement framework with which to make that determination. You need to specify that first, and then it becomes an answerable question.
Okay. I mean, we wanted to time box it, and we are a bit like even over. So I guess I wrap it here, but I, of course, want to give you also the option to ask me one last question or two, or maybe say something. So to wrap it up.
Sure. I think I'm good for now, but thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. And write in the comments maybe your questions, your yes, no questions, and thanks for listening so far. This was our yes-no debate, and I'm curious, did the question-driven approach make it easier for you to understand the claim and follow its pro and counter arguments? Let me know in the comments. And I also want to invite you, if you hold a very or somewhat interesting belief that you want to discuss with me in such a yes-no debate, either in person or via video, then just reach out to me via yesnodebate.org and we will hold a similar debate. And to all the others of you, if you just like this debate, please like and subscribe to the channel to stay tuned for more such debates.